Red's Fly Shop, this is Bob. How may I help you today?
Look at that. Woo! Hey, it's Joe from Red's Fly Shop here talking about a subject matter of which I have not talked about before, and that is stuff you don't need to get started or become a fly fisherman. I'm just coming off of kind of a great experience last week. We had a 3-day youth camp, and we spent quite a bit of time helping counsel local families, a lot of whom were my really good, close personal friends, what their teenagers needed to get into fly fishing and just eliminating all the junk they didn't need to help make it cost effective. And then to understand the tackle that you do own. It's very important that when you make an investment in a few things that you understand how they work and how to execute upon them. So we'll just get right to it. Let's talk about stuff you don't need if you're just getting started in fly fishing. Number one, waders and boots. They're expensive, they take up a lot of space, and they're not going to get used in June through September. So become a fair weather angler when you're first getting into it. Fish during the summertime. It doesn't matter what shoes you wear in the water as long as you're being safe. Old running shoes, closed-toed sandals, anything that allows you to just get your feet wet and get in the water, whether it's on lake, pond, little creek, or big river. Don't let waders and boots, the illusion that you need waders and boots, become a barrier to entry. Number two, a fancy fly fishing pack, vest, chest pack, or whatever it is. You should start with a very minimal amount of gear. Eventually, you're going to have more flies, a little more tackle, a few tools that you understand, a little more stuff that you've experimented with. At that point, you've got some assets to organize. Buy the fanciest fly fishing bag and pack you want so that you can stay organized and be spontaneous and get out there. Next one is a net. Hey, I hate to break to you, but when you're first starting in fly fishing, you're probably not going to be catching so many fish and such large fish that a net would really be considered essential. You'll get there eventually. Don't worry about getting a net. And then there's a whole long list of tools. You don't need name brand fly fishing clothing. You don't need a leader straightener. You don't need fancy nippers. What you need is just a spirit for adventure and then a few basic essentials. But yeah, the youth camp we did was very eye-opening. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that kind of at the end of the video after I talk about kind of the essential gear that I deem as bare bones essential to get started. But I'll talk a little bit about how we took our teenagers some of them from knowing very little in 3 days to knowing a lot through a series of experiences that we had that I think are very applicable to anybody. I don't care what your age is. Now this video is for either somebody who's just getting started in fly or those of you that are very enthusiastic followers of the channel and anglers that may be mentoring or bringing somebody into it. Maybe that's son, daughter, spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, coworker, whoever it is. Maybe they've mentioned they want to get into fly fishing. Forward this video to them because I'm going to make it stupid simple on how to get into it. So I've got some gear down here on the table, and I'm going to go through how many items? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 items. And, well, including my sunglasses and my hat, which are essentials, there's going to be like 7 items that I feel like you have to have. Let's start with the big one, rod and reel. If you're purchasing a rod and a reel, one of these pre-made kits is a great way to go. You can spend less. I think that this is called the Redington Original, or we call it Red's the OG. We really like the OG. Easy casting rod. It will take you a long ways into fly fishing, especially if you upgrade the fly line at some point down the road. This rod is not going to be a limiting factor in your angling for some time. Now, if you spend much less than this, I feel like you're setting yourself up to buy something again if you're really in love with fly fishing. So the Redington OG is like a starting point for me, but under 200 bucks, you're getting a fly rod, a reel, and a line. I'm not going to take everything apart for just with respect to length of the video, but you're really getting a ready to fish kit along with a tapered leader in here. So literally, if I were to get this and tie a fly on the end and find some water, I would be fly fishing. More importantly, this is the big step. If you're going to buy one thing, get this, because if you want to become proficient, practice your casting, which you can do. We practice and learn, we do most all of our casting lessons are all on the grass, on the lawn, where we don't have this cognitive distraction of how to catch the fish. When you're practicing on the lawn or in your backyard, you can work on your casting motions and focus on what your hand is doing, your wrist, your elbow, the rod tip, and actually concentrate on getting a good cast when you don't have this distraction of standing out and moving water, for instance. We see people learn so much faster. So get the rod and the reel. There's a link in the video description, probably a little pop-up that pops up there, but the OG is a great place to start. Heavily endorse that product for a beginning fly fishing outfit. Okay, so I'm just gonna have to walk you through some of this because I'm trying to keep things brief. You have a fly line, which is a thick vinyl, often brightly colored portion of the line that's on the reel. It's all installed there. And then the end of that, you have a transparent line called a leader. And the leader can be anywhere from 7.5 feet to 9 feet long for most trout fishing applications. Get a couple of tapered leaders, okay? So you need a couple of those. Those are 9 feet and they're 4X. That represents the diameter, 7.5 pound test. Maybe you can catch 7.5 pound fish. That's the breaking strength of the line. That's a very good average for most of your trout fishing. Now, tapered leaders are really important. I recommend you get a couple of tapered leaders because where it goes from thick to very, very thin on the end, eventually that thin piece, for maybe you change your fly a few times, maybe you tie a couple of bad knots and you got to retie it, eventually the thin tip on the end is going to become eroded at a certain point. And when it becomes eroded, we're eventually going to replace it. Now, I just recommend when you're getting started, get a couple. There's a 2-pack of these, link in the video description, just replacing the whole tapered leader and not worrying about learning any complicated knots right off the bat to splice line into your leader to repair it. Later on, when you're fishing a lot more, we can teach you how to splice in and use a material to repair that. And that repair material would be called a tippet material. Comes on a little wheel of line. But just don't worry about those knots. The only knot we want you to worry about is just learning how to tie your fly on. And if you're taking notes, it's called an improved clinch knot or a fisherman's knot. It is just tying your fly on, then you're fishing. Let's keep it simple. Okay, so you need a couple of tapered leaders. Now, eventually we're gonna need to cut some line. We're gonna need to pinch a barb on the hook of the fly. We're gonna need a tool. Now, I use this one tool 90% of the time. Keep you in suspense here. Dr. Slick scissor clamp, okay? So these little guys right here are very handy. They're obviously a little micro plier. I could do a lot of different things with this, but they have a set of scissors in here, and that's how I trim my line most of the time. I actually just grab my line, trim it here. Most of the places that you're gonna be fishing wild trout require a barbless hook. And so with these hemostats, you're gonna need something that we can take and we can actually pinch the barb on the hook and make that a barbless hook so that it goes in my shirt or material. That's how the ranger will check, and it comes right back out because I was able to crush that barb flat with my scissor clamps here. So the scissor clamps are very, very handy for a lot of things. I use them to open a bag of chips, cut stuff, cut line, do all sorts of things. I think they're just a very handy tool, but if I had to choose one tool to get started, Bare Essentials scissor clamp from Dr. Slick. I tie these on an elastic band around my neck, so they hang around my neck just like that. You've probably seen those in a lot of my videos. And if you want to go more basic, more Spartan, you can just clip them onto your shirt or clothing just like that. So we need scissor clamps are one of the tools. Next, let's go ahead and talk about flies, then I'll talk about this in a second. There are 3 major categories of flies, and I love for beginners to just understand this and keep their fly selection super simple when they're starting so they know how to present or just how to fish the 3 different types of flies. And the 3 different types of flies are dry flies, which just like it sounds, floats on the surface, just like a bug floating on the surface of the water, whether it's a lake or a stream. The second is going to be an insect that either swims very slowly or just crawls around on the bottom, and then occasionally it's a free ride in the current of a river, and that would be called a nymph. And lakes and ponds have many nymphs too, in the form of water boatmen, damselfly nymphs, dragonfly nymphs. Nymphs in still water tend to swim around. There will be a nymph, and then the last one will be a streamer, which is an actively swimming insect imitation. And we'll just start with, these are the flies that if I were setting somebody up, somebody I cared about, you guys, that I would set you up with to get started so that you understand what each fly does and you learn to fish these flies, and then eventually when we get some more experience or have success, we move on to other fly patterns. But you could do a lot with these. I think I've got 5 fly patterns in here, and if you had 2 of each just to get started, that would be like, you know, kind of your survival pack. So that's a green woolly bugger there, and that is going to be fished. You can fish it in lakes or rivers. Oh, that focus is driving me nuts. Green woolly bugger. Okay, there's links in the video description. I'll pop up links to the flies so you can get a really good look at them. Woolly buggers are a great place to start anytime you're fishing in lakes. There's lots of critters that swim around under the surface in lakes. You've got leeches, dragonfly nymphs, damselfly nymphs, all sorts of minnows and other things swimming around. And I'm a huge advocate, as I'll rant at the end of the video, on beginning anglers starting in very small lakes and ponds for their first angling experience. So I think that's very important. So yeah, get some woolly buggers. I chose the most classic one of all time that I could, black and green woolly buggers. Those sink. They're fished in a swimming fashion, so we would work on our cast to get our line to propel out. They would sink, and then we would manipulate the fly, swimming them back in to generate action, swimming up that fly under the surface. But you can fish those in rivers too, but they're universally across the globe, just a very useful pattern. And the things you learn when you fish a woolly bugger are applicable to all sorts of other more like specific streamer patterns later on. Now let's go to the surface, okay? So now we're gonna go to the top. And it's just going to be a big old caddis fly, okay? Big old caddis. And it's important with your dry flies. We will call this a category of small dry flies. So this one gets cast out, it floats around on the surface. You could fish this in a lake, you could fish it in a river, small creek, doesn't matter. But that fly is going to float on the surface, and we're going to be able to see that fly actively fishing on the surface. Now, as a beginner, it's critical that you can see the flies you're fishing, that they have a large visibility attribute to it, like the big white, what we call a post or a parachute wing on that one. There's a white spot on top. That's for your viewing pleasure, because your cast is likely to not hit exactly where you're looking. You need to be able to see and identify your fly if you're going to be able to fish it. So it's especially important for beginners to be able to fish flies they can see. And that fly catches fish. It's a caddis fly. And that's called a parachute caddis from the Rio Fly Company. Next, let's go back underwater. And it's important to have a few beadhead nymphs as well. And the beadhead nymphs that I'm showing you here can be fished in lakes or rivers. In a lake, we would fish them in a swimming fashion. And in a lake, we would probably fish them in a dead drifting or just a drifting fashion. But you need to have a couple of nymphs that imitate a small underwater or aquatic insect. Now, the last one we'll show you is going to be called a chubby Chernobyl, and that one miraculously, oh, I had it in focus for a second there. A lot of the time you see an insect, it's black. Bugs are black. Very easy to identify that. It's got legs, it's got a black body, a sharp outline, and there's a white wing on top, so you can see it really well. Now, this is every trout's greatest fantasy right here. It's going to make it into whatever bug it wants to be. Oh, I can put it right back there in the painting behind me. See that? They're chasing the black Chernobyl. But it could be a cricket, a stonefly, a hopper, a June bug, a beetle, wasp. You can fish it in lakes or ponds. You can catch trout, bass, bluegill, panfish. Lots of different critters love the look of that bug. You can move it on the surface. It's a great fly for beginning anglers to fish. It's fun and easy. It's easy to see, and it's useful in a big variety of different waters and applications. So those are the 5 flies that I would recommend that you have to have. Now, lastly, as far as an item that I brought literally or physically out of the shop, is just some fly floatant. That's going to be a waterproofing agent for your dry flies to help keep them waterproof, keep them on the surface. It's very easy to apply. Put a drop in your fingers, rub it on the dry fly, floats great. Then I would say floatant, I would call in that essentials category. Now, we talked about footwear real briefly, not having to have wading boots and things like that. I'll touch on that again in a second. But up top, got to have a hat, got to have your shades, preferably sunglasses or polarized. And I want to hit on the importance of that and why that is in the essential category versus just a glass. One of the most exciting parts about fly fishing is seeing the fish approach your fly or seeing the fish in the water and seeing it come towards your fly, because that whatever you did with your fly, whether it's the fly you chose or how it landed or how you moved it, has enticed a strike or an interaction with this animal that is hunting your fly as though it's its prey. When that fish is coming up, I mean, it's like a lion or a predator or any type of predator that wants to get some food. It's got to sneak up on that bug and get it just like that. And it's very exciting when you have decent polarized sunglasses and you get to see what is one of the greatest joys of fly fishing firsthand. Now, when it comes to all that junk that I said you didn't need, okay, and I'll just call it junk for the moment because I don't want that to be a bunch of static that distracts you from actually like getting somewhere and getting into this or recruiting somebody else in a fly. Eventually, you're going to get to the point where those items, whether it's a nice pack, an extra rod, a better reel, a higher quality fly line, some bigger variety of leaders and materials, obviously a bigger fly selection, better clothing, the list goes on and on and on. You're going to want that stuff eventually. It's going to enhance your experience. You're going to be more effective. You're going to go out more often. You're going to stay longer. I really do think there's a place for having nice gear, especially the older I've gotten. Some of my gear might be 8, 10, 15 years old, and it has been a very, very good investment, especially things like good wading shoes and good wading pants or anything that makes contact with the water has some value, but you don't have to have that stuff to get started. Really want to start very basics so that you understand how stuff works. Let me take you through real quick on like the transition we just went through with all of our teen youth camp that we had, and how just it was an amazing success and watching the students progress over the course of 3 days. Part of it's because they were with us, but part of it is because we went through a really good process or transition with them, and that could have been done by a lot of different mentors and have to be us here at Reds. But the first day we went to a local lake called Lake Mattoon, bluegill fishery, little bass fishery, lots of small fish. And we watched those kids catch fish again and again and again, where they could see a fish in the shallows. They would attempt their presentation. If it was a bad presentation, they might not get bit. If it was halfway decent, they'd get bit. Then they learned to set the hook and react. They learned how to handle the line. They learned what it looked like when a fish came up to the fly and refused, and then they would refrain from setting the hook. The list of skills goes on and on and on and on. And they didn't just get to do it once or twice. They got to do it dozens and dozens of times with these fish. And they caught lots of fish, had a blast, and built a huge variety of skills because we got a whole bunch of repetition in on day one. Day two, we went wade fishing on a mountain stream, which I think is like the next natural progression. So we went wade fishing on pretty good sized freestone stream, not the Yakima River. And I think everybody in the camp caught fish that day on foot, walking a stream for cutthroat and rainbow trout. So that was the next transition. We're upstream dry fly fishing, and then even swinging nymphs walking downstream on a lot of those little mountain streams that can be very effective. And I say little, it's not little, but it is a mountain stream with a trout have kind of a freestone or an aggressive attitude towards the fly on those types of streams. So that was a great success. And then we didn't get into drift boats. We did end up putting them in drift boats with our guide staff the last day. And that's like kind of the pinnacle. That's where targets are coming at you very quick. You kind of have to have everything down pat in order to take advantage of it. And the kids that I had in my boat the last day landed 32 trout on a guided trip. And kind of a guided trip. I mean, like they were still tying a lot of stuff themselves. The point being, like, when you progress from things that are like where it's easy to understand the gear, it's easy to get repetition on smaller fish, on still water. Still water, I think, is very important. I can't stress that enough. Like when you're first starting fly fishing, try to get out on lakes and ponds and things like that. And then progressing towards like a moving drift boat, in a Western style format. That would be like the pinnacle. And a lot of you watching this video might not have access to that, but hopefully someday you get to jump in the bow of a drift boat and get to experience that. Find local lakes and ponds. Use your state fisheries website or your state agency to help you identify smaller lakes with warm water species like bass and panfish. If those are in your area, I think that would be a wonderful place to start just because the repetition that you can get. And if you're watching this and you're watching it this long and you're more experienced, maybe you are going to try to mentor somebody. I think that you will see massive progress. There's no mending, there's no distraction, there's no moving water. It's just getting some really good casting in, some really good fishing and learning to set the hook, fight fish, and then move or agitate the fly in a way that is attractive to those fish, whether they're bluegill. Huge fan of bluegill for beginners. Anyway, hope you enjoyed the video. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out the video description for helpful links, and then I will try to get back to any comments or questions and provide any recommendations on beginner tackle that I can.